Breaking news to cover here today. Rick Joyner's Morningstar Ministries has been hit with another 2 lawsuits that they mishandled the SA of minors at their ministries. This is on top of the massive lawsuit that they have pending, which names a dozen people associated with the ministry, which stems from a volunteer youth leader, Erickson Lee, was arrested on charges of SA with several minors at the church. So you'll see here a picture of Erickson Lee, who attended court and was sentenced this week. We're going to get into this today. We've had several high-profile sexual scandals in the church that have included minors this year. This whole entire year is like waking up from a bad dream, and the exposures keep coming, and I believe that they will continue to unfold as the year goes by. Erickson Lee was a volunteer youth leader, was just sentenced to 8 years in prison, and he was found guilty on several accounts of SA of minors. Morningstar claims that these incidents happened off the grounds of the church, and there is nothing they could have done to prevent this. However, Julie Royce from the Royce Report is reporting that Erickson Lee's father, Doug Lee, is the head of security for Morningstar Ministries. So it seems this problem was right under their nose. You almost can't make this stuff up if you tried. So you will see here in the Julie Royce Report article that basically the plaintiffs are suing Lee and Lee's father, Doug Lee, who is the head of security from Morningstar Fellowship Church. Okay, so the main person who was involved in the SA of minors is the father of Morningstar's head of security. So basically, this is a bombshell information that is sure to get this ministry in a lot of trouble. It doesn't seem like they might be able to not survive something like this, as we saw with IHOP KC, almost reduced down to nothing. But from my knowledge, there were no lawsuits yet against IHOP KC. This is different in the case of Joyner, and the charges are piling. So many are familiar with Rick Joyner, who is most famous for the restoration of Todd Bentley, who had several moral failures back to back over the years, and yet he is still in ministry. And despite having never really repented, according to Jack Deere, who was involved in his restoration process, Todd Bentley continues in ministry, and it's something that even Joyner talks about him being happy about it. But we are going to talk about the current lawsuit pending and what is going on. And then there were 2 lawsuits filed this week. We're going to take a look at those. And Chris Reed releases a clarifying statement on why he left the ministry. All of this information today is coming from trusted news sources like the Royce Report, the Christian Post, and Charisma Magazine. Hi, my name is Joshua Simone. Welcome to my channel. The ministry is called Torn Curtain. That's because when Jesus died and rose again, the curtain in the Old Testament temple was torn from top to bottom. We now have a new covenant, a better covenant, and direct access to a relationship with God through Jesus' death and resurrection. So on this channel, I'm going to cover all things related to the charismatic church, news and politics, culture, teachings, testimonies, and interviews. I have a separate channel just for evangelism and reaching the lost. But this channel is for those on the inside of the church. So many people say to me, Josh, just shut up and preach the gospel. Well, I wouldn't be preaching the gospel to the church, although with everything that we're seeing unfolding, maybe we need to start doing that again. So hit the subscribe button. Please help me get to 100,000 subscribers. 87% of my audience has not subscribed. So please do that if you've been watching my content for a while and you've enjoyed it. I'm going after the tough and controversial subjects. Many people might see that or interpret that as being divisive. But the things that we say that we're not to talk about are often the things that we need to talk about, and then spin these subjects with a redemptive narrative that God will turn around for the good, all things for those that love him and are called according to his purposes. Now let's look at a Chris Reed update on why he left the ministry. This is much different from the reason he said he left the ministry in his initial written statement. So let's hear what Chris has to say in this video released last week.
Family, just come to you tonight in response to regards to a couple of things. Number one, there seemed to have been some confusion over my departure from Morningstar. My departure from Morningstar was what I said in the letter to the department heads and to the staff and volunteers, which was this. I said I did not want to be leading the ministry that would be in a case against 4 victims who were abused as children by a former volunteer of the ministry who is a policeman as well. This happened before I came to Morningstar, and I could not, because I know the families, I know the victims, many of them, we've got to know them. I made a tough, painful choice. And I just didn't care, if I lost everything, that I wasn't going to, because if I defended the ministry, then it was like I'm having to go against the victims. If I defend the victims, then where does the ministry stand? So the truth is, it wasn't a fight that I wasn't going to fight. It happened all before we came here.
Okay, so you're seeing Chris Reed's statement there that basically he lit the ministry because he could not be involved in a ministry that's a part of this situation. He felt like he was in a lose-lose situation, that if he stood for the ministry, that he was against the victims, or if he stood with the victims, he was against the ministry. Chris Reed did disclose that him and his wife were also victims of SA when they were children. So I guess this story hit close to home for him. But I guess also he saw the storm of pending lawsuits coming towards the ministry and saw it as a good time to exit. But 2 of the victims of the alleged child SA by a Morningstar Ministry volunteer youth leader filed 2 separate lawsuits this week. So we're going to get into that today. So please hit the like button if you're enjoying the content so far. It helps to tell YouTube to get this content out to more people. A quick thing you can do to help me. But so this is bringing the number of lawsuits against Morningstar Ministries to 3 different cases. So this is a very serious situation for them. A similar lawsuit filed against Morningstar was filed last month. That was the first one. And on Thursday, Erickson Lee, the guy who I showed you his picture at the beginning of the video, the volunteer youth leader named in the civil lawsuit, failed to show for a court date in South Carolina for criminal SA charges with 4 different victims. When Lee, a former cop, decided to not even show up for court this week, which prompted an arrest warrant, then Erikson Lee was served with a 9-year prison sentence by a judge this year. Originally, it was 8 years, but because he didn't show up to his court date, they tacked on an additional year. So God is on the side of justice. Justice will be served. Erickson Lee will be in jail for quite some time, and he will be a registered sex offender for the rest of his life. So we are seeing justice in these cases. The Bible says to leave room for God's anger, for leave room for God's justice, because vengeance is his. The human anger does not produce the righteousness of God. So in this case, Erickson Lee will be in prison for a long time. Now there's all the civil lawsuits that are impending and unfolding that is going to take a long time to clear up. So these civil lawsuits allege that the leaders of Morningstar Ministries mishandled decades of SA by other unnamed people prior to Lee's alleged SA. So this seems to bring to light that the fact that it seems here that it looks like the allegations are showing that there are many different occurrences of SA over many different years that are even separate from this situation with Lee. So this is very serious. The suits filed 3 or 4 alleged victims in the criminal suit accused Morningstar founder and recently reinstated President Rick Joyner and other leaders of grossly negligent and reckless conduct. There is no telling how many others have occurred and were shut down by Morningstar and its leadership. The two suits filed this week with the state. Rick Joyner did preach at church last Sunday, and he had a pretty cavalier attitude towards all of this. He seemed to be acting as if it was no big deal and everything was going to be fine. But he said that many would leave the ministry, but he was very optimistic because we could use their seats. So it was his way of saying nicely, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Joyner claimed that they have good insurance and everything will work out because they didn't do anything wrong. That they had a ministry come in and do a forensic audit, and that ministry said that Morningstar had done everything right according to procedure. It should be noted that there is a huge gap in the way that baby boomers handle allegations of SA compared to the younger generations like the millennials and the Gen X's. The way many people in the older generations seem to deal with these charges are kind of like more of a minimalization or a dismissal towards these sexual abuses, or maybe some of them have a suck it up attitude. But the younger generation, which has more access to various therapy and psychotherapy, they realize that this stuff is a big deal and has huge impacts on a person's life. So that's why part of the reason why I think we're going to see more and more of this stuff come to light, because the younger generations do not take this stuff lightly or dismiss it. Of course, I'm speaking in general terms, so this wouldn't apply to everybody, okay? But 3 lawsuits allege that Lee, who led Morningstar's Young Special Forces ministry for teenage boys from 2019 to 2022. He provided alcohol, porn, and then had SA with multiple children tied to his ministry. All 3 victims are represented by the same attorney. Last year, Lee was charged by the York Sheriff County Office Special Crimes Unit and charged with 11 crimes. It should be noted that Lee's father, as I stated before, brought to light by the Roy's report, that Lee's father is Rick Joyner's head of security at Morningstar Ministries. So this was right under their nose. But Erikson Lee, faced with these 11 different crimes charged against him, took a plea deal, so they dropped 6 of the charges. But Lee pleaded guilty to 5 of the charges related to the SA of minors, and he's going to now see 9 years in prison. Joyner told the Roy's report that he hasn't had a chance to read the 2 most recent lawsuits. But again, I noted that Rick didn't seem bothered by all of this. Last week, Rick Joyner, in his sermon, claimed that these lawsuits and accusations against the prophetic ministry were outrageous, and that the charges against the ministry were so ridiculous that he had to fight back. He also said these things didn't happen on the property of the ministry and that no paid staff members were involved. On top of all this, Rick Joyner is facing severe criticism for promoting Chris Reed, while many found out last week that Chris was sexually involved with a Morningstar Ministry student who was a young single woman in her 30s. Rick claims that either Catherine or Chris Reed or both lied to him and that he didn't have all the information at the time. He was told that it was just texting and kissing, but there was no sexual behavior. But we found out last week that there was. And a 20-year-old employee who was a pastor with the ministry, his name is Justin Perry, released a video last week talking about the Chris Reed allegations and things from his side of the equation. He's just a wonderful man of God who didn't look like he had a bone to pick with the ministry, but stated as someone who was with Morningstar for 20 years that this situation with Chris Reed was so disturbing that when he found out about the details, he immediately started praying about leaving the ministry. So Justin Perry was then charged in the restoration of Chris Reed through this situation. But it seems like only after a couple of weeks that he came in one morning before the restoration had even started, according to his account, and Chris Reed was promoted to CEO of the whole entire ministry, and now Chris was his boss, indicating that no or very little restoration ever took place on his end. So Justin Perry ended up leaving the ministry. So now on to the two current lawsuits that have been filed. This stuff has alcohol, porn, driving with minors, SA, intimidation. This is just ugly, folks. But it's important to note that these are allegations at this point. And in the United States court system, you are innocent until proven guilty. So Erikson Lee did plead guilty to several of the charges, but these new charges are allegations in the court of law, and at a surface level, it doesn't really look good, but we need to leave room for the legal process to play out, etc. So let's get into the charges. But before we do that, this video today is brought to you by Birch Gold, one of the most trusted sources in adding gold to your investment portfolio, your IRAs and 401ks. It is a way I can fund the ministry and offer a product that I personally believe in. Investment professionals are warning about tough financial times ahead in the stock market. And most people's investment is related to the United States dollar, which are showing some problems. So many are suggesting that you diversify and own hard assets like gold, silver, precious metals, and real estate because they will always hold value even if the market crashes. So one way to secure your financial future is to make sure that some of your portfolio is in precious metals like gold and silver. I saw this week that Donald Trump has $250,000 in gold in his portfolio. Rich people understand that it's good to have insurance, that gold will always be worth something. Now, all securities do come with risk. I am not a financial professional, so you're responsible to do your due diligence. But the people at Birch Gold will give you a great education on gold so that you can make an informed decision. But gold prices have beat the stock market every year for the last 20 years. So get your free gold kit today from Birch Gold. Find out how to do this at birchgold.com/torn curtain. Birch is BIRCH gold.com/torn curtain. A couple of people have reached out to me and told me that silver is really the hot buy right now. Silver would be the better choice because gold prices are at all-time highs right now. So back to the video. We are now going to get into the two lawsuits that were filed this week against Morningstar Ministries, and we're going to follow the Roy's Report article on this. So you're seeing here Morningstar Ministries front door to their campus here. It's just a beautiful property with many, many acres. But you're going to see here that the Roy's Report is going to cover this in great detail, so we're going to go over this. One lawsuit was filed on August 7th by John Doe, number 1. Then there was a second lawsuit followed by John Doe, number 2. And then there was a third lawsuit filed by John Doe, number 3, in the York County District in South Carolina. All three plaintiffs are suing Lee, who has been already convicted, as we talked before. Lee's father, Doug Lee, who is head of security at Morningstar's Fellowship Church. Rick Joyner, former youth leader Chase, former Morningstar VP Dave Yearns, and 10 unnamed Morningstar staff or ministry associates. So you're going to see right here that these lawsuits are big. They're going after a wide umbrella of people. They're not just suing the ministry, but they're suing all of the individuals associated with this ministry. And this is going to get very ugly. Some of these court cases can carry out for years, even decades. So 3 different lawsuits are pending, and they're going after Rick Joyner personally. So this is very, very serious situations. And the more likely that these things go on, the more ugly that they can get. So all 3 of these lawsuits are SA cases, including one which an unnamed employee sexually assaulted 2 female Morningstar University students in the 2000s. So this is quite some time ago. The three suits also describe a separate incident where a mother was suspicious of an unnamed volunteer and asked leaders to separate her child from that volunteer, and later the volunteer did abuse that child, the suit states. These suits allege that Morningstar and its church did not protect the victims, noting that the ministry had a responsibility to be more proactive and to protect its vulnerable populations. Okay, so I talked about this for being in ministry for many, many years, basically, especially in youth ministry, working with minors. This is a protected population, and all of these things should be reported to the authorities immediately. If there's any type of abuse with a child or even an adult in that matter, this is a matter for law enforcement to get them involved immediately. But some of these ministries, I'm not saying this is the case in Morningstar, hesitate to do that. They want to try to look at the allegations in-house first beforehand. But the first thing to do is always contact the authorities. And if you do that from the get-go, you kind of can avoid some of this back and forth that we're going to see here. But the first responsibility is to make sure that these things are reported, especially if there are minors involved. But these things are tricky, right? Because sometimes these incidences happen off the grounds or with people that are not associated with the church. I know in youth ministry, a lot of times you'll be doing evangelicalistic outreaches and you'll be having non-church youth come into the ministry. And so basically you're trying to help these kids, but sometimes these people could be a bad influence on everyone else. Well, it's the same with adults too. These churches can have all the people that they're trying to outreach come into the ministry, and then they'll do things off the site in the church, and they'll be a bad influence to Christians. Okay? And there's no way for churches to police all that activity that happens outside of the church premises and to vet all of the people that are involved. So unfortunately, like this stuff does arise. I'm not defending Morningstar Ministry. We're going to have to wait to see what happens in the court of law. But I'm just trying to say that these things could be kind of tricky because you can't police all the people that are involved in a church ministry. So according to the suits, Lee would get the boys drunk and during ministry events and even on trips, and then he would SA them. The most recent suit states that the SA happened on the church property, and Lee also drove minors while he was drunk. John Doe, suit number 2 states. So that's pretty serious. Youth leaders, pastors should not be driving with congregants around. It's an insurance issue, let alone. But it seems like not only he was driving with these youth, but driving intoxicated. I know for ministries and church, a lot of them have church vehicles, vans, and buses. In my case, I'm glad that the ministry provided me with vans and buses and stuff, but I don't know, maybe in this case, the church didn't have a vehicle for them to access. But you shouldn't be driving around with minors a lot unless you have their written permission and their parents' permission to do so. So Lee and fellow youth leader Chase Portello were former Marines and on their way to becoming cops when they worked together with the Youth Special Forces, this suit state. Portello enabled Lee's exploitation of children, according to the suits. So both these youth leaders also sent intimidating notes to a victim at Morningstar. Leaders were informed of the explicit text Lee sent to the victim, the suit states. Erickson Lee left the second note on John Doe number 3's car outside of his house, included a picture of him at a young age, and noted saying that he's being watched. John Doe number 3 suit states. According to all 3 lawsuits, Morningstar leaders failed to protect children, showing a pattern of leniency towards alleged abusers. This suit asserts that leaders failed to report child SA to law enforcement, despite clergy being mandated reporters in South Carolina. In multiple cases, leader also encouraged victims not to report abuse to law enforcement, the suit states. Defendants' conduct was extremely and outrageous, to exceed all possible bounds of decency, and is intolerable in a civilized community, John Doe number 2 suit states. The Lees 4 alleged victims attended Lee's criminal court hearing Thursday, waiting for hours when he didn't show. They provided a written statement that was read in court describing Lee as a predator and a master manipulator. Okay, so we're seeing here that Rick Joyner is telling everybody, and publicly came out last week, that none of these things happened on their campus, on the ministry grounds, and that they had no staff that were involved. Yet these lawsuits seem to claim directly contradict some of these claims, according to the Roy's report. So there seems to be a conflict in the different accounts. But this is pretty ugly. There are numerous charges, numerous defendants, multiple people getting sued, and that is most likely the main reason why Chris Reed exited the ministry, because this is going to be a major legal firestorm. Not to mention that Rick Joyner is getting older and older and advanced in age, and now he's going to have to take over a ministry, run that ministry day to day, but defend it against various lawsuits. That's going to be a very hard situation for them to overcome. But ultimately, I would see that a lot of Rick's people are older. They're baby boomers at this point, so I think that he's going to have a ministry for the next couple of years, or maybe even 10 years, because these older people are going to come out. They're going to support Rick. They're going to be loyal to Rick. But I think at some point in the future, the long-term future of Morningstar is definitely in jeopardy here. This is a very serious situation, and I don't see how they survive this. As the case we saw in IHOP KC, they dissolve large parts of the ministry to dissolve themselves of financial liability in many cases. So we'll see what happens as this all plays out, but it's very ugly. We're in a season of cleansing in the church. We're in a season where God is doing a deep work, where he's bringing some of these things to the surface. And before I close here, I just had one important thing that I wanted to share with you guys on how I think some of this stuff happens. So it turns out that one of my former students this week happened to become gravely ill, and almost to the point of possibly losing his life in the hospital. And it's a very serious situation. It's a complicated medical situation. There are several different issues going on. So I've just been praying for my former student this week, and got in contact with the family, etc., but realized that his family said that maybe some of what he's going through was related to the youth ministry. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, there was no allegations of SA abuse in any ministry that I was involved in. So I want to make that very clear. But they said that basically he picked up some bad friends and bad influences from the youth ministry. And then so I took some time to think about it, and I realized that happened after I left. Okay, so after I left, the ministry took on volunteer leaders. They didn't replace with a full-time youth leader. And then volunteer youth leaders are not going to do the job that I did. And the group kind of went downhill, and some bad influences came to the youth group, and some kids in that ministry went down the wrong direction. But somehow I got the feeling that the parents might have saw me as responsible for all of this, but I can say that this stuff did not happen on my watch, like any funniness, like kids smoking or drinking or anything like that. If I was aware with it, I dealt with it right away. I talked with the students, I talked with the parents, I talked with, the other elders and pastors in the church, and we handled the situations right away. But I realized what happened when I left this ministry, the ministry took a different turn. So it's in these transitions in ministry when you have one main leader and then another leader comes in, or maybe there's a gap in between, that leaves a nice opportunity for the enemy to come in these situations. So it made me realize that there always needs to be a full-time person on staff that's awake and aware, because a lot of the times when you're transitioning or heading on to your next job is when a lot of these situations are going to happen. So in my case, as I was leaving, as I left shortly after, this youth group a pocket of kids started heading in the wrong direction, and there was nothing I can do about that. I was in seminary thousands of miles away, kind of consumed with my own tests. So we must cover ministries and transitions. I don't know if this is related to the fact that Rick Joyner was transitioning out of the ministry and about to hand it over to Chris Reed, and that everybody else assumes that someone else is paying attention and at the wheel of the vehicle when it could be that they're not. But I've seen this not only in my case now that I'm looking back, but also in other ministries that I've been associated with. These type of problems can happen as a ministry is transitioning, and while it's transitioning, no one is paying attention. So that's just one gift of wisdom that I wanted to give everybody, to different churches, pastors, leaders. I have many different pastors that watch this channel and reach out to me. And just to tell everybody, make sure that there's somebody always in charge, always paying attention, even in seasons of transition, because I'm seeing in this situation that could have possibly been how some of this stuff happened. That there was just nobody at the helm that was really paying attention 100%, that it was their full-time job. So I just wanted to add that in play. I'm praying for all of the John Does and Jane Does involved in this. Praying for everybody at Morningstar, particularly the people that attend that ministry, because they could really be affected by this. Some of them can lose faith because of all of this. But I just want to encourage everybody. According to Romans 8:28, according to Genesis, where he says, I will take what the enemy meant for harm, and I'm going to turn it around and use it for my good. This is the power of the gospel. Romans 8:28, that God will turn around all things for those and use all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purposes. So although this is very serious situations at this point, we just want to continue to pray for all involved, particularly first for the victims, and then for the people that attend this ministry, that God would use this situation for the good of all those involved, that we would not forsake the assembling, that we would not stop going to church, that we wouldn't become disillusioned with God or quit our faith, that we would draw closer to God more than ever, that we would draw closer to the gospel message of sin and repentance, that we would draw closer to take communion on a weekly basis, that we would grow closer to the Lord and spend more time in prayer. Because the enemy is like a roaring lion, looking who he can devour, looking to see who he could destroy. Stay awake, stay alert, stay sober. And especially if you are a ministry leader, it's important that you are fully engaged with your ministry at all times, paying attention, awake and aware. As leaders, we are called to more responsibility. I'm a chaplain myself that do a lot of volunteer work in the community with hospitals and charities, etc. Mandated reporter to report any abuse, anybody that's being injured immediately to authorities. But the point is we also need to be paying attention to everybody that's under our ministry as leaders, because if you're not paying attention, people can really get hurt. If situations aren't being managed right, the enemy can really come in. And even when you're really paying attention and managing things right, the enemy is still going to come in and deal with these things. There are always going to be situations in the church. We're never going to be in a perfect church with perfect people. That's not an excuse for sin. That's not an excuse for poor behavior. But we're always going to have these type of situations. It's just a matter that we get involved immediately, take it very seriously, handle the situation, not trying to, hide anything or gloss over anything, to take everything serious, to hand it to the authorities and move on. But it's important for ministry leaders to really take their job seriously, and when allegations come against the ministry, get involved right away and do something about it immediately. And don't give the enemy any room to move. Now, I'm going to close today. And I'm just going to encourage you to comment down below. Let me know your thoughts of everything going on at Morningstar Ministry with Chris Reed. Let me know your thoughts, things that are going in your area that is similar to this. Comment down below. The first comments that I come in, I'll try my best to respond to. I appreciate it. You guys say the most amazing things and give some insights. I learn more in the comment section than I do out of most of my videos. And if you've been blessed by the ministry and you've watched these videos for quite some time and you want to give so I can continue to do videos like that, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can give a one-time gift via PayPal or Zelle. Find that in the description section below in the video. And if you really like the content, become a monthly partner on YouTube. Hit the join button or join me over at Patreon and become a monthly partner. I can't do this long term without getting some more monthly partners. So I'd appreciate that. And the monthly partners, I'll get a chance to work more closely with you and etc. So thank you for that today. I'm going to close the video. Let me close in a word of prayer real quick. So Lord, I just pray for everybody involved in this situation at Morningstar Ministries. God, that you would cover everybody involved, particularly the victims and the people attending these ministries, that you would just put your hand upon them and that you would turn this situation around for the good of those who love you. For those who have been injured or hurt or victims in this state, Father, I pray that you would just heal them to the uttermost. Come and encounter them, Lord. Don't let this be a way for the enemy to steal their faith, but a way for them to come to a new level of faith. In the midst of great offense and sin, your grace and mercy can overcome those things. And so we're praying for healing and restoration for all those involved, that you would cover over this whole situation and that in the long term you would turn it around for the good of those who love you and are called according to your purposes. So remember, Christianity is three things: to love God with your whole heart, mind, and soul. You take the love that he's given you. It comes inside. You take that identity that he loved you as a son or daughter of God, and then you take that and go outward and you love other people. If you truly love God, you're going to love other people. They're mutually exclusive. They cannot be separated. And Jesus says this fulfills the whole entire law, to love God and to love people. And thirdly is the Great Commission, something we often forget about as Christians. 9 out of 10 people do not share their faith. We have the Great Commission to go out into all the world, baptizing people in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, to tell them about the gospel message that Jesus died, was buried, rose again on the third day, to help us with sin, to defeat sin, guilt, shame, to defeat the grave. And he gives us eternal life. We're raised with new life with him, free from sin, free from bondages, to live the life that he's called us to. And that God's going to put his Holy Spirit on us so that we could fulfill the purposes and plans that he has for us in this life. So go out into the world, tell people about God, tell them about the good news and the gospel message. Be blessed. Thank you.